My wife consulted a twice-divorced friend about controlling boundaries. My evidence, revenge, set the ultimate boundary with divorce papers. Advice from someone who couldn't keep her own marriage together? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. And let me tell you, it was about to become the beginning of the end of her little power game. It started 3 weeks ago when I noticed my wife acting differently. Not the good kind of different, mind you. The kind where she suddenly became an expert on healthy boundaries and self-respect, after spending hours on the phone with her recently divorced friend. This friend, by the way, had just gone through her second divorce and was apparently now qualified to be a relationship guru. The first red flag was when intimacy became conditional. One evening, after a perfectly normal day, I approached her like any husband would, and she literally held up her hand like a traffic cop. "We need to talk about boundaries," she said, like she was reading from a script. "I've been doing some research, and I think we need to establish some rules about when and how you can initiate physical contact. Rules about touching my own wife." I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was already connecting the dots. This had her friend's fingerprints all over it. The second red flag came 2 days later when she started questioning every dollar I spent. Not because we had money problems, we were doing fine financially, but suddenly every coffee, every lunch with colleagues, every small purchase required a detailed explanation. "It's not about the money," she'd say with this newfound confidence. "It's about mutual respect and transparency." Transparency, another buzzword that screamed coach behavior. But the real kicker came when she tried to implement what she called emotional labor boundaries. Apparently, I was no longer allowed to vent about work stress without first asking permission and setting a time limit. "Your problems shouldn't become my emotional burden without consent," she announced one evening again, sounding like she was reciting a manual. I nodded calmly and said, "Interesting perspective. Where exactly did you pick that up?" The way her face flushed told me everything I needed to know. That weekend, while she was out for her weekly coffee date with the divorce expert, I decided to do a little investigating. Not snooping, just paying attention to details I'd been ignoring. Her laptop was open on the kitchen counter, and there it was, a browser history full of articles about training your husband, setting boundaries with men, and how to stop being a doormat in marriage. But what really caught my attention was a saved document titled Boundary Implementation Strategy. I didn't need to read it to know where this was heading, but curiosity got the better of me. It was a step-by-step guide on how to gradually gain control in a relationship, starting with small boundaries and escalating to complete behavioral modification. The document had notes in the margins. Clearly, in her handwriting, "Tried this. He just agreed. Need to be more firm, and the most telling one, maybe too subtle. Ask her about phase 2. Phase 2. This was getting more ridiculous by the minute. When she returned from her coffee date, she was practically glowing with renewed purpose. "We need to have a serious conversation about our relationship dynamic," she announced, settling into the living room like she was about to conduct a business meeting. I sat down across from her and waited. "I've been thinking about what I deserve in this marriage," she began, "and I realize I've been accepting less than I should. From now on, I need you to respect my boundaries about household decisions, social commitments, and personal space." "And what exactly does that look like?" I asked, keeping my tone conversational. She pulled out her phone and started reading what was obviously a prepared list. "First, no more making plans without consulting me first. Second, equal say in all financial decisions, regardless of who earns what. Third, I need advance notice before you invite friends over or make any changes to our routine." I listened to her entire list, watching as she grew more confident with each point. When she finished, she looked at me expectantly, probably waiting for me to argue or get defensive. Instead, I just nodded thoughtfully. "Those are certainly some specific requirements," I said. "I'm curious, though, how long have you been working on this list?" The question caught her off guard. What do you mean?" "I mean, this level of detail doesn't just happen overnight. You've clearly given this a lot of thought, or maybe you've had some help thinking it through." Her defensive reaction confirmed everything. "Why does that matter? These are my feelings, my needs." "Your needs," I repeated slowly. "Right, and I suppose your friend just happened to validate all these newly discovered needs." The conversation ended abruptly when she realized I wasn't going to play the role she'd expected. No anger, no defensiveness, no desperate attempts to negotiate. Just calm observation and pointed questions that made her uncomfortable. That night, as she scrolled through her phone before bed, I could see she was texting someone. The screen reflection in her reading glasses showed enough for me to catch fragments. "He's not reacting right. Maybe need stronger approach. Call you tomorrow. As I lay there in the dark, I realized my wife had declared war on our marriage, without even having the courage to do it openly. She'd enlisted a general who'd already lost 2 battles and was now trying to win a 3rd through my wife. Well, if she wanted to play strategic games, she was about to learn that I'd been observing her moves from the beginning. And unlike her consultant, I had no intention of losing. The next phase of her campaign launched exactly 1 week later, and I have to admit, her divorced friend had taught her well. Unfortunately for both of them, I was about to demonstrate the difference between theory and practice. It started with the accountability system. My wife presented me with a spreadsheet, and I'm not exaggerating here, an actual color-coded spreadsheet that tracked my daily activities, expenses, and social interactions. This isn't about control, she explained with rehearsed confidence. It's about transparency and mutual respect. I looked at the document, complete with categories like unexplained absences, discretionary spending, and friend time versus family time. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. Fascinating, I said, setting it down without filling anything out. And you'll be maintaining a similar spreadsheet for yourself, I assume. The pause was telling. This is about addressing the imbalance in our relationship. I already contribute plenty of emotional labor. Emotional labor. There was that phrase again. The spreadsheet sat untouched on the kitchen counter for 3 days. Every morning, she'd glance at it meaningfully. Every evening, she'd make pointed comments about following through on agreements. I continued my routine exactly as before, neither acknowledging the document nor explaining my actions. Then came phase 2 of her strategy, the controlled communication protocol. Suddenly, conversations became scheduled events. I need you to set aside time this evening to discuss our day, she'd announce. And please come prepared to share your thoughts and feelings about our relationship progress, like we were in some kind of corporate restructuring. The scheduled conversation attempts were comedic. She'd sit me down with prepared questions, clearly coached responses ready for my anticipated reactions. The problem was, I wasn't giving her the reactions her friend had prepared her for. When she asked, "How do you feel about the changes we're implementing?" I responded with, "I feel like you're reading from a script. How does that make you feel?" When she tried to initiate a discussion about emotional availability, I countered with, "Define emotional availability. Use your own words, not something you read online." Her frustration was becoming visible. The conversations would end abruptly when she realized her prepared responses didn't work against someone who refused to play along. But her master stroke, according to whatever manual she was following, was the withdrawal of affection technique. For an entire week, she became a roommate. No casual touches, no warmth, minimal conversation beyond logistical necessities. She moved through the house like I was invisible, clearly expecting me to crack under the pressure and come, crawling back, begging to know what I'd done wrong. Instead, I thrived. I started coming home later, not despite her, but because work was actually more pleasant than the Cold War atmosphere she'd created. I cooked my own meals, did my own laundry, made my own plans. When she'd sit in the living room, obviously expecting me to join her and initiate some desperate conversation about fixing things, I'd head to my office or go work out. The beauty of her strategy was that it required my participation to be effective. Without my emotional reaction, it was just her being unpleasant for no apparent reason. By Thursday of that week, I could see the cracks forming. She kept glancing at me during dinner, clearly expecting some kind of breakdown or plea for reconciliation. When I simply finished my meal and thanked her for cooking, her confusion was almost tangible. Friday evening brought the explosion. She cornered me in the kitchen and demanded to know why I wasn't fighting for our relationship. "Fighting for it," I repeated, leaning against the counter with genuine curiosity. "I thought you were setting boundaries. I'm respecting them." "That's not, you're supposed to." She stopped herself, realizing she was about to admit the manipulation. "I'm supposed to what?" I asked. "Beg you to treat me normally, chase after you, demanding to know what I did wrong, fall apart because you're withholding affection." Her silence was the answer. "Here's the thing," I continued, keeping my tone conversational. "Your strategy only works if I don't recognize it as a strategy, and it definitely only works if I value your approval more than my own peace of mind." She stared at me like I had just revealed I could read her thoughts. "For the past 2 weeks, you've been treating our marriage like a behavioral modification experiment. The spreadsheets, the scheduled conversations, The emotional withdrawal, it's all straight out of some amateur psychology playbook. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Of course you don't. That's why you keep texting your divorced friend every time one of these tactics doesn't work. That's why you have articles about training husbands in your browser history. That's why you suddenly started using phrases you never used before in your life. The color drained from her face. The really interesting part, I continued, is that you seem to think I haven't noticed. Like I'm some kind of lab rat who's just going to stumble through your maze without realizing there's someone moving the walls. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. So, here's where we stand, I said, straightening up. You can continue with your little experiment, but you're going to do it alone. I'm not participating, I'm not chasing, I'm not begging, and I'm definitely not filling out any more of your spreadsheets. That night, I heard her on the phone again, her voice more frantic than before. It's not working, she was saying. He's not reacting the way you said he would. The response was apparently lengthy because she listened for several minutes before saying, Are you sure? That seems extreme. Extreme. Now things were getting interesting. The next morning, she was back to being overly sweet, making my favorite breakfast and asking about my plans for the day. The sudden shift in tactics was so obvious it was almost insulting. Big change in strategy today? I asked, taking a bite of the perfectly prepared eggs. She laughed, but it sounded forced. I don't know what you mean. I just thought it would be nice to start the weekend on a positive note. Positive note, right? I finished my breakfast and stood up. Well, I appreciate the effort, but I'm not really interested in emotional whiplash. If you want to have a genuine conversation about our relationship, I'm available. If you want to continue running plays from your friend's playbook, you'll be doing it without me. As I left for my Saturday morning routine, I could see her reaching for her phone again. The war was escalating, and she was about to learn that her general had been fighting the wrong kind of enemy all along. The weekend brought reinforcements. Her divorced friend was coming over Sunday for what my wife called a girls' day, but I knew better. This was a strategy session, and I was about to meet the mastermind behind the operation. Saturday night, my wife was unusually chatty, asking detailed questions about my thoughts on our relationship and whether I felt we were making progress. The sudden interest was transparently motivated, clearly gathering intelligence for tomorrow's consultation. I think, I said carefully, that we're definitely learning a lot about each other. She smiled like she'd scored a victory, completely missing the fact that what we were learning wasn't particularly flattering for her. Sunday afternoon, the general arrived. I was in my office when I heard the doorbell, followed by an unusually loud greeting. They wanted me to know she was here. Within minutes, I could hear them settling in the living room, voices carrying just enough for me to catch fragments of their conversation. He's being completely unreasonable, my wife was saying. Nothing I try works anymore. Men like him need stronger boundaries, came the response. You're being too subtle. Sometimes you have to embarrass them into compliance. Embarrass me into compliance. Now we were getting to the real strategy. An hour later, my wife appeared in my office doorway. We're going to dinner with the Johnsons tonight. I already told them we'd meet them at 7 o'clock. This was new. She'd made social commitments without consulting me, directly violating one of her own boundary rules. The hypocrisy was deliberate. Interesting, I said, not looking up from my computer. And this was discussed when exactly? I'm discussing it now. We're leaving in an hour. I could hear her friend's voice from the living room, clearly coaching her through this confrontation. Actually, I said, closing my laptop and giving her my full attention, I have other plans tonight. What plans? The plans I made when you were having your strategy meeting in the living room. Her confidence wavered slightly. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're being deliberately difficult. No, I said, standing up. I'm being consistent. You want to establish rules about consulting each other before making plans. I'm following those rules. You're the one breaking them. She didn't have a response ready for that one. But here's what we're going to do, I continued. We're going to dinner with the Johnsons, and we're bringing your friend along. I think it's time I met the architect of all these new relationship strategies. The look of panic that crossed her face was worth the price of admission. Dinner was a masterclass in controlled demolition. Her friend, let's call her the general, was exactly what I'd expected. Overconfident, recently empowered by her own divorce settlement, and convinced she understood all men based on her failures with 2 husbands. She started the evening by making pointed comments about modern women who don't settle for less than they deserve. The Johnsons looked uncomfortable, clearly sensing an agenda but not understanding it. That's fascinating, I said when she finished her opening speech. And how long were you married before you figured that out? Twice, she said proudly. Both times I had to learn to value myself enough to walk away. Walk away, right? I took a sip of my wine. And now you're sharing those insights with married women. My wife kicked me under the table, but I was just getting started. I'm curious, I continued, addressing the general directly. What's your success rate with the advice you give? How many marriages have you actually helped strengthen? The question hung in the air. Mrs. Johnson was trying very hard not to smile. Marriage isn't about success rates, the general replied defensively. It's about self-respect and boundaries. Boundaries, I repeated thoughtfully. Like the ones you set with your first husband? Or the different ones you set with your second husband? My wife was shooting daggers at me, but the general was getting flustered. Every relationship is different. They certainly are. Some people learn from their mistakes, others just repeat them with new people. Mr. Johnson cleared his throat and changed the subject to sports, but the damage was done. The general spent the rest of dinner making increasingly desperate attempts to regain control of the conversation, each one making her sound more bitter and vindictive. The real show came after dinner when my wife tried to implement what was obviously a planned public humiliation. As we were saying goodbye to the Johnsons, she suddenly announced, "You know, it's so refreshing to see couples who actually communicate and respect each other's boundaries." The implication was clear. Unlike her own husband, Mrs. Johnson looked confused. "I think all couples have to work at communication." "Oh, absolutely," my wife continued. "But some men just refuse to evolve. They think marriage means they can do whatever they want without consequences." I could see the general nodding approvingly from behind her. "That's true," I said agreeably. "Some people definitely think they can manipulate their way into getting what they want instead of just being honest about their needs." My wife's smile faltered. "Take tonight, for example," I continued, addressing the Johnsons directly. "My wife made these dinner plans without consulting me, which violates the boundaries she recently established about mutual decision-making. But rather than acknowledge the inconsistency, she's trying to make me look like the unreasonable one." The silence was uncomfortable for everyone except me. "The really interesting part," I added, looking directly at the general, "is that this strategy apparently comes from someone who's proven twice that she doesn't understand how successful relationships work." Mrs. Johnson's eyes went wide. Mr. Johnson was clearly trying not to laugh. The general's face went red. "You don't know anything about my relationships." "I know they ended," I said simply, "both of them. And now you're trying to end mine using the same strategies that failed you." The evening ended abruptly after that. The ride home was silent, except for the general's muttered comments about toxic masculinity and men who can't handle strong women. As we pulled into our driveway, I turned to the general in the back seat. "I have a question for you. If your advice is so effective, why are you divorced twice and giving relationship counseling instead of being in a successful relationship yourself?" She got out of the car without answering. Once we were inside, my wife exploded. "How could you embarrass me like that?" "Embarrass you?" I laughed. "You brought your divorce consultant to dinner specifically to gang up on me in public, and you're worried about embarrassment?" "She's my friend. She's your puppet master, and tonight everyone saw the strings." The general left without saying goodbye, but not before I heard her tell my wife, "He's more resistant than we thought. You might need to consider more serious measures." More serious measures. Now we were getting somewhere. After the general left, my wife tried to salvage the evening with another sudden shift in tactics. "Maybe we can talk about what happened tonight. I think there were some misunderstandings." "No misunderstandings," I said. "Just a failed attempt at public manipulation. Your friend's strategy worked great in her imagination, but reality turned out to be a little more complicated." She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "You can keep following advice from someone who's batting zero in the marriage department, or you can start having honest conversations with your actual husband. But these amateur psychology experiments stop now." The war was escalating exactly as I predicted, and her general was running out of battle plans. Tuesday morning brought the smoking gun I'd been waiting for. My wife left for work early, claiming an important meeting, but her rushed departure had left evidence scattered around the house like breadcrumbs leading to the truth. On her nightstand sat a book I'd never seen before, Reclaiming Your Power, A Woman's Guide to Relationship Dynamics. Curious title for someone who claimed to be working on mutual respect and healthy boundaries. I flipped through it casually, page after page of highlighted passages, margin notes, and sticky tabs marking specific strategies. Chapter titles, like breaking down male resistance, the strategic use of emotional distance, and making him compete for your attention, told me everything I needed to know about her recent education. But the real treasure was the notebook tucked between the pages. Her handwriting filled dozens of pages with detailed observations, strategy notes, and what could only be described as a manipulation manual customized specifically for me. Week 1. Tried boundary conversation. He stayed too calm. Need more direct approach. Week 2. Emotional withdrawal not effective. He seems happier when I'm distant. Ask General about this. Week 3. Public embarrassment backfired. He turned it around somehow. Maybe need to document his reactions for evidence. Evidence. That word made my blood run cold. I kept reading. The entries became more detailed, more calculated. She was tracking my responses like a scientist studying lab behavior, noting which approaches produced which reactions, adjusting her methodology based on results. Day 12. Tried scheduling intimacy. He refused without arguing, concerning lack of emotional investment. Day 15. Started questioning his spending. Got defensive reaction finally, might be exploitable weakness. Day 18. General says documentation important for later. Started taking photos when he looks angry or dismissive. Photos. I set the notebook down and thought about recent weeks. All those times she'd had her phone out during our conversations, claiming to check messages. She'd been building a case file. I photographed every page of her notebook with my own phone, then carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it. If she was documenting me, turnabout was fair play. That evening, she came home later than usual, bringing takeout and an unusually cheerful attitude. I thought we could have a nice quiet dinner and maybe talk about how we're doing. Sure, I said, accepting the food while mentally cataloging this sudden mood shift. According to her notebook, positive reinforcement was supposed to follow periods of conflict to create emotional dependency. Over dinner, she steered the conversation toward our relationship challenges, asking leading questions designed to get me to admit fault or express insecurity. Every response I gave was clearly being evaluated against some internal checklist. Do you think we're growing apart? She asked, her tone carefully concerned. Why do you ask? I countered. I just feel like you're not as emotionally available as you used to be, like you're pulling away from intimacy. I almost laughed. She'd withdrawn intimacy as a manipulation tactic, and now she was trying to make me feel guilty about not chasing after it. That's interesting, I said. What makes you think I'm the one pulling away? The question caught her off guard. According to her manual, I was supposed to either get defensive or start apologizing and trying to reconnect. After dinner, she excused herself to take a phone call, stepping out to the back porch where she thought I couldn't hear her. But sound carries through windows, and her voice was more animated than it had been all evening. He's definitely being more resistant, she was saying. The positive reinforcement isn't working either. He just answers everything with questions. A pause, then. Are you sure about the next phase? That seems like it could backfire. Another pause. Okay, but if this doesn't work, I think we need to consider the nuclear option. Nuclear option. That phrase sent me straight to my computer. I spent the next hour researching divorce tactics and manipulation strategies. What I found was disturbing. The nuclear option in relationship manipulation circles typically involved creating documented evidence of emotional abuse, unreasonable behavior, or mental instability to use in divorce proceedings. Suddenly, all those photos she'd been taking, all that documentation of my reactions, all the careful notes about my responses to her boundary setting made perfect sense. She wasn't trying to improve our marriage. She was building a case to destroy it while making herself look like the victim. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. The lock screen showed notifications from a group chat called Divorce Recovery Support. A curious name for someone who claimed to be working on her marriage. Her laptop was open on the kitchen counter. Browser tabs revealing the full scope of her research, articles about documenting emotional abuse, building your case for custody, and maximizing divorce settlements filled her recent history. But the most damaging discovery was an email draft in her outbox addressed to a divorce attorney. The subject line read, Consultation request. Emotionally distant husband. The email detailed months of alleged emotional neglect, manipulation, and controlling behavior. According to her narrative, I was a classic emotional abuser who used silent treatment, financial control, and intimidation to dominate our relationship. She described herself as a victim finally finding the courage to seek help. Every single accusation was a twisted version of her own behavior projected onto me. The financial monitoring she tried to implement became a controlling nature. Her emotional withdrawal became a silent treatment. Her manipulation attempts became evidence on me intimidation tactics. The most chilling part was her request for advice on documenting patterns of emotional abuse for legal purposes. She was actively seeking coaching on how to manufacture evidence against me. I forwarded the draft to my own email address, along with screenshots of her browser history and photos of her notebook entries. If she was building a case, I needed one too. That evening, she initiated another one of her scripted conversations, this time with her phone positioned to record video. She started asking questions designed to provoke reactions, accusations about my commitment to the marriage, challenges to my emotional availability, implications that I didn't respect her as an equal partner. But instead of playing into her script, I smiled and said, "You're recording this, aren't you?" Her face went white. "It's okay," I continued, still smiling. "I've been doing some recording of my own, along with some documentation. Turns out I'm a pretty good researcher when I put my mind to it." She fumbled to stop the recording, but I held up my hand. "Don't worry about the phone. We're going to have a very different kind of conversation now, one where we both put our cards on the table." I pulled out my own phone and showed her the photos of her notebook, her browser history, her email drafts. "So, here's what's actually been happening," I said calmly. "You've been taking advice from a twice-divorced woman on how to manipulate and document your husband's behavior to build a case for divorce. You've been treating our marriage like a legal strategy session, collecting evidence and manufacturing scenarios to make me look like an abuser." She opened her mouth to deny it, but I continued. "The boundary setting, the emotional withdrawal, the public humiliation attempts, even tonight's little recording session, it's all been preparation for divorce proceedings where you plan to paint yourself as the victim of an emotionally abusive marriage." The silence stretched between us. "The only problem with your plan," I said, standing up, "is that I figured it out, and now I have documentation of the real manipulation happening in this house." She finally found her voice. "You don't understand. I was just trying to protect myself." "Protect yourself from what? A husband who loved you and trusted you enough not to see what you were doing until it was almost too late?" The conversation ended there. She retreated to the guest room and I heard her on the phone within minutes, her voice frantic and upset. But I'd heard enough. I knew exactly what the next phase of her plan would be, and I was finally ready to implement my own strategy. The game had changed completely. She'd been playing chess while I thought we were just having a conversation. But now that I understood the rules, it was time to show her what a real strategist could do. Wednesday morning, I implemented my counter-strategy. While she slept in the guest room, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. First call, my attorney. I forwarded him every piece of evidence I collected, along with a detailed timeline of her manipulation attempts. "This is preemptive documentation," I explained. "She's building a false case against me. I need to protect myself legally." Second call, the bank. I separated our finances, not to control her, but to prevent her from claiming financial abuse while simultaneously protecting my assets from her upcoming legal strategy. Third call, a private investigator. I need documentation of her activities with this divorce consultant, professional documentation that will hold up in court. By the time she woke up, the foundation of her plan had crumbled. She discovered the financial changes when her credit card was declined at lunch. The phone call came immediately. "What did you do?" she demanded. "I protected myself," I said calmly, "just like you've been doing for weeks." "This is financial abuse." "No. This is financial responsibility. Your joint account has your salary deposited automatically. You have access to all your own money plus half of our shared savings. What you don't have access to is my ability to pay for your divorce attorney." The silence told me everything. That evening, she came home with the general in tow, both of them armed with printed articles about financial abuse and controlling behavior. They sat me down for what was clearly intended to be an intervention. "This has gone too far," the general announced. "Cutting off her access to money is classic abuser behavior." I pulled out my phone and started recording. Please continue. I'd love to hear more about your expertise on marriage and financial management. Stop recording me, she snapped. Why? You've been recording conversations for weeks. I thought documentation was important for healthy relationships. My wife tried to regain control. We need to talk about this rationally. Rationally, I repeated. Like when you were rationally planning to accuse me of emotional abuse in divorce court? Or rationally when you were documenting my reactions to use against me legally? Both women went quiet. I set my phone down, still recording. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to read something and you're both going to listen. I pulled out printed copies of her notebook entries, her browser history, and her draft email to the divorce attorney. Week 1, tried boundary conversation. He stayed too calm. Need more direct approach. I looked up. This is your handwriting, correct? She couldn't deny it. I continued reading her manipulation timeline, her documentation strategy, her plans to manufacture evidence. With each entry, the general's face grew paler. The most interesting part, I said, finishing the last entry, is this email to a divorce attorney describing me as emotionally abusive, using twisted versions of your own behavior as evidence. I turned to the general. This is your advice at work, teaching married women to manipulate and document their husbands to build false abuse cases. That's not. I never told her to lie. You told her to document reactions. You told her to push boundaries until she got responses she could use. You taught her to treat her marriage like a legal strategy session. The general was trapped, and she knew it. So here's my boundary, I continued, looking directly at my wife. You have 2 choices. You can continue down this path, in which case I'll see you in court with all of this evidence proving your manipulation and false accusations. Or you can end this game right now, and we can have an honest conversation about what you actually want. My wife looked at the general, who was already reaching for her purse. I think I should go, the general said quickly. Actually, I said, standing up, I think you should stay. I want you to hear what happens when your advice meets reality. I walked to my computer and pulled up social media. I've prepared a post about manipulation in marriage, featuring some anonymous examples of how divorced people sometimes try to sabotage existing relationships. Should I publish it? The general's eyes went wide. You can't do that. Watch me. I clicked publish. Within minutes, comments started appearing from people who recognized similar patterns, sharing their own stories of manipulation attempts. The general's tactics were being exposed in real time. Delete that, she demanded. Why? It's all anonymous. Unless you're worried people might recognize the strategies. She grabbed her things and left without another word. My wife sat in stunned silence. So, I said, sitting back down, ready for that honest conversation now? The silence after her friend left was different. For the first time in weeks, my wife looked genuinely vulnerable instead of strategically emotional. I never wanted it to go this far, she said quietly. But it did go this far. The question is why? She stared at her hands. I felt like I was losing myself in this marriage, like I didn't matter. So instead of talking to me about it, you decided to manipulate me into submission and document evidence for a divorce case. When you put it like that, it sounds terrible. It is terrible. You treated our marriage like a hostile takeover. She looked up with tears in her eyes. I was scared you'd leave if I told you how unhappy I was. So you tried to make me the villain instead. Make me look like an abuser so you could leave with the moral high ground and a favorable settlement. I know how it looks now, but that's not how it felt then. I leaned forward. How it felt doesn't matter. What you did matters. You spent months lying to me, manipulating me, and building a false case against me. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't undo weeks of psychological manipulation. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that you were planning to destroy my reputation in court. She was crying now, but I'd seen too many calculated tears recently to be moved by them. Here's the reality, I continued. You crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. You didn't just betray our marriage, you tried to weaponize it against me. What does that mean? I pulled out an envelope I had prepared earlier. These are divorce papers. I've already filed them. Her face went white. But I thought, can't we work this out? Work what out? Your manipulation, your lies, your plan to falsely accuse me of abuse? I'll do anything. I'll cut contact with her. I'll go to counseling. Anything. You'll do anything now that you've been caught. Where was this motivation when you were documenting my reactions for your lawyer? She had no answer. But I'm going to give you one chance, I said. One opportunity to show me who you really are when the games stop. Hope flickered in her eyes. You can sign these papers tonight, and we'll proceed with an amicable divorce. I won't use any of the evidence I've collected against you. You'll get a fair settlement, and we'll both move on with our dignity intact. Or you can fight this, in which case, every piece of documentation, every manipulation attempt, every lie you've told gets presented in court. Your divorce consultant's advice gets exposed publicly. Your false abuse allegations get proven false with evidence. She stared at the papers. The choice is yours, but it's permanent. If you choose to fight, there's no going back to the easy option. Is there a third choice? Can we try to save this? I looked at her for a long moment. Do you want the honest answer? She nodded. I don't trust you anymore. Every conversation we've had for weeks has been a manipulation attempt. Every emotion you've shown has been strategic. Every boundary you've set has been a power play. But I can change. Maybe you can, but I can't forget what you're capable of when you think you're not getting your way. She picked up the divorce papers with shaking hands. You have 24 hours, I said. Sign them or prepare for a very public legal battle where all of this comes out. And if I sign them tonight, then we handle this like adults, fair division of assets, no contests, no drama. You move on with your life, and I move on with mine. She was quiet for several minutes, reading through the papers. This is really it, isn't it? She said finally. This is what happens when you treat your husband like an enemy to be defeated instead of a partner to be respected. She set the papers down and looked at me. I know I messed up, I know I hurt you, but ending our marriage seems so extreme. Extreme was planning to falsely accuse me of abuse. Extreme was manipulating me for months while pretending to work on our relationship. This, I gestured to the papers, is just the consequence. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow night. After that, the offer expires. The next evening, she came home early. The signed papers were on the kitchen counter. I signed them, she said simply. Good choice. For what it's worth, I really am sorry. I lost myself in all of this. I believe you, and I hope you find yourself again, with someone who deserves the person you decide to become. She nodded and went upstairs to pack. 3 months later, our divorce was finalized. No contest, no drama, no public accusations. She moved to another state for a fresh start. I kept my word and never used the evidence against her publicly, but I also kept it just in case. Marriage was over, but I'd learned something valuable. When someone shows you who they really are under pressure, believe them the first time. And never let anyone make you the villain in your own story.